State property too, or paid in full? I'm in them both. Be careful.
I think he
gotta
knows.
say state property too.
That's right. Goddamn, I
State
saw.
property too.
0% on Rotten Tomatoes, $11 million in the vault, shot on active drug corners where real bodies had dropped, a clothing line with hidden gun holsters sewn into the lining. Aaliyah booked for the soundtrack, dead before she could record a single bar. And the man who built the whole empire? He just lost every frame of film he ever made for $100.50. State property was never supposed to work. No major studio, no Hollywood pedigree, no critical respect, not one single positive review. Just a $600,000 gamble, a rap label with a camera, and a city that had been waiting for someone to tell its story exactly the way it lived it. 23 years later, this film is still talking, still moving, still raising questions nobody has fully answered. You already know the surface. Today, we go under it. 28 weird facts about state property. The ones that never made the press release, the ones buried in the credits, and the ones that will completely reframe how you see this movie. Are you ready? Let's get into it. Fact number 1. The director built his way to this film. One Jay-Z video at a time. Before Abdul Malik Abbott ever sat in a director's chair on a feature film, he was earning the room one project at a time. It starts in 1989. Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, Radio Raheem, Fight the Power. One of the most consequential films in American cinema, and Abbott was in the sound department, not directing, working, learning, absorbing how a master filmmaker captures a neighborhood alive with tension and consequence. A few years later, he crossed paths with a young rapper named Sean Carter and directed his very first music video, I Can't Get With That. Then came Dead Presidents. Then Ain't No with Foxy Brown. Then The Streets Is Watching, a long-form video project that functioned almost like a short film. By the time Roc-A-Fella needed a director for their first feature, Abbott wasn't a stranger. He was family. He knew the roster, the aesthetic, and what Jay-Z's world looked like from the inside. State Property was his feature debut, but he had been rehearsing for it for over a decade. Fact number 2. The film was based on a real Philadelphia crime syndicate, and their actual motto became the tagline. Get down or lay down. You've heard it, you've probably quoted it, but that line didn't come from a screenwriter. It came from the streets of Philadelphia in the late 1980s, the operating motto of one of the most violent drug organizations the city ever produced, the Junior Black Mafia. The JBM, founded and run by Aaron Jones. They controlled cocaine and heroin distribution across Philadelphia with ruthless precision. They didn't negotiate. They didn't warn twice. Get down or lay down was a policy statement, not a catchphrase. The organization's territory, hierarchy, and code of silence fed directly into the bones of state property's story, not adapted loosely, ripped from lived reality. Here is what makes this genuinely chilling. Aaron Jones is currently on death row in Pennsylvania. The violent state property dramatized for entertainment is the same violence that sent real men to the execution chamber. Some former JBM members said the film got certain details wrong, but the framework, the culture, the code, they couldn't dispute that. Roc-A-Fella didn't make a gangster fantasy, they made a gangster echo, and the streets heard it clearly. Fact number 3. Beanie Siegel's name came from 3 sources. One of them is Kanye's fashion empire. Dwight Grant needed a stage name. He found it in 3 places: his grandmother, his block, and a dead mobster. His grandmother called him Beanie as a kid. Then there was Siegel Street in South Philadelphia. His neighborhood, his world. Put them together, and you get Beanie Siegel. But there is a third layer, Bugsy Siegel, the infamous gangster, whose name carries the weight of organized crime history. Whether intentional or not, the echo sits there. A grandmother's love, a street's identity, and a gangster's shadow folded into 2 words. Now the bonus. In 2021, Kanye West publicly credited Beanie Siegel with giving him the nickname Yeezy. The man who played Beans in a $600,000 hood film helped name one of the highest-grossing fashion brands in global history. Philadelphia always stays connected. Fact number 4. The crew was filming on active drug corners, and the danger was not theoretical. State property shot on location in Philadelphia in 2001 on streets where drug trafficking was happening in real time. Not former hotspots, active corners, active product, active danger standing 20 feet from the camera. Cast and crew described the tension firsthand. The people standing across the street weren't extras waiting for their call sheet. They were there because that corner was where they worked. Additional scenes were shot in Paterson, New Jersey, Yonkers, and parts of New York City. But Philadelphia was the heartbeat, and the heartbeat came with risk no production insurance policy could fully cover. How do you tell a story about the streets with complete authenticity? You film inside them. That decision gave state property its texture and credibility. It also put real people at genuine risk every single day of the shoot. Fact number 5. Jay-Z's starring role was about 2 minutes of screen time. Look at the poster. Jay-Z's name is front and center. His face anchors the promotional campaign. You would be completely forgiven for expecting a Jay-Z film. His actual screen time? Blink, and you are already past it. Director Abbott was candid. It was more of a cameo. It wasn't the ideal situation. State property filmed in 2001, the same year Jay-Z released The Blueprint. He was running Roc-A-Fella Records, building Rockaware, touring, recording. Full shooting days were not available, so they adapted. Jay-Z plays Untouchable Jay. The silent kingpin Beans is trying to surpass. Cool, commanding, barely present. It works precisely because of the mystery, but the gap between the marketing and the reality remains one of the most significant disconnects in the film's entire history. Jay-Z sold the movie. The movie just couldn't contain him. Fact number 6. Aaliyah was booked for the soundtrack. She died days before she could record. The state property soundtrack needed a crown jewel. For the Rock the Mic remix, they wanted a voice that would elevate everything around it. Roc-A-Fella executive Kareem Biggs Burke played Aaliyah the track. Her response was immediate. That's the one. No hesitation. She was scheduled to fly into the studio and record with Just Blaze. The session was booked. The feature was locked. August 25, 2001. Aaliyah's plane went down in the Bahamas. She was 22 years old. Engineer Young Guru later described what happened when news reached the Roc-A-Fella camp. It was the first time he had ever seen Biggs cry. The remix still happened. Nelly and Murphy Lee stepped in and delivered. But the version that exists is the replacement, not the vision. The original died on a runway in the Bahamas. Every time you hear that track, you are hearing the absence of something that almost existed. Fact number 7. Sunday Carter went from playing Beans's girlfriend to Basketball Wives L.A., but her background was serious theater. Before reality television found her, Sunday Carter was studying drama at Temple University and training at the Freedom Theater in Philadelphia, one of the oldest and most respected African-American theater institutions in the country. State property gave her one of her earliest film roles, Aisha, Beans's love interest. The woman caught between loyalty and survival. After that, she kept working. Soul Plane in 2004, Bringing Down the House with Steve Martin and Queen Latifah, music videos for Busta Rhymes and Music's Soul Child. Then in 2013, Basketball Wives L.A. on VH1. Her arc gets lost in the larger state property conversation. The film was full of real talent the culture didn't always stop to acknowledge. Carter was one of them. Fact number 8. The $600,000 budget returned 18 times. Its investment, critics had nothing to do with it. Total production cost, $600,000. Roc-A-Fella funded it entirely internally. No studio interference, no bloated overhead. Theatrical box office, $2.1 million across just 61 theaters, already a meaningful return. Then home video rewrote the entire story. DVD sales, VHS rentals, BT putting the film on rotation until entire neighborhoods had it memorized. Total earnings climbed to approximately $11 million, 18 times the original budget, 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. 18 times ROI. The critics wrote the reviews, the streets wrote the checks. These are fundamentally different economies operating by completely different rules, and state property proved a project could fail catastrophically in one and dominate entirely in the other. That is not an accident. That is an audience telling you exactly what they wanted with their own money. Fact number 9. The clothing line came with hidden gun holsters built into the design. State Property Apparel launched as a subsidiary of Roc-A, the same name on the movie poster, now on hoodies and jackets. Roc-A-Fella understood brand synergy before the word became a corporate buzzword. But here is the detail that changes the conversation. The clothing line included garments designed with hidden gun holsters sewn directly into the lining. Not aesthetic gun details, not decorative references. Functional concealed holsters, built into consumer apparel, available for purchase. Think about what that means in the context of a film marketed heavily in urban markets where the JBM's actual legacy was still being felt. The clothing line wasn't just merchandise, it was a statement, and depending on your perspective, either brilliant authentic street branding or something considerably more troubling. Drop that in the comments, because this one deserves a real conversation. Fact number 10. Damon Dash's character was originally written entirely for Jay-Z. Boss Dame wasn't supposed to exist. That role was written for one person, Jay-Z. Director Abbott described the original vision plainly. If Jay-Z had delivered all the lines written for that character, he would have done it in a nonchalant, straight-to-the-point way, which is precisely how Jay-Z operates in every room he enters. But Jay couldn't commit, so Abbott split the character in two. Untouchable Jay became the silent kingpin, minimal screen time, maximum implied authority. Boss Dame, played by Damon Dash, became the enforcer, louder, more present, significantly more comedic. Dash leaned into that dimension hard, bringing levity that critics found tonally jarring against the surrounding violence. One character became two. One vision became a compromise. And that compromise created one of the most debated tonal inconsistencies in hood cinema history. Fact number 11. The film got 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, but the soundtrack hit number 1. The reviews were not just bad, they were historically bad. Rotten Tomatoes, 0% across 12 reviews. Not a single positive response among professional critics. Metacritic, 9 out of 100. The New York Times called it a remarkably tedious film. Variety described it as shot down by a hackneyed script and atrocious acting. These weren't mild reservations or measured disappointments. They were verdicts, delivered unanimously and without hesitation. The audience did not care even slightly. The State Property soundtrack dropped January 29, 2002, 11 days after the film's theatrical release. It debuted at number 14 on the Billboard 200 and hit number 1 on the top R&B/hip-hop albums chart. By August 2003, it had moved 147,000 copies. Just Blaze production, Kanye West production, Beanie Siegel and Freeway trading bars over beats that landed like consequences. Here is the larger truth. Critics score films using criteria built around craft, storytelling convention, and institutional film culture. Fans buy albums, memorize bars, and keep films alive through loyalty and identification. These are not competing metrics. They are parallel universes with no shared currency. State Property failed catastrophically in one universe. It dominated completely in the other. 23 years later, fans still remember every scene. The critics moved on within the week. Fact number 12. It was shot on Super 16mm and blown up to 35mm for theaters. $600,000 does not buy 35mm cameras. It buys creativity and problem solving. State Property was shot on Super 16mm film, a smaller, cheaper format typically associated with documentaries, television production, and independent cinema that can't afford the larger format. Super 16 costs less to shoot, processes differently, and carries a particular grain and texture that 35mm simply does not replicate. For theatrical release, the negative was blown up to 35mm, standard practice for low-budget productions seeking big-screen distribution. The process introduces visible grain. It softens certain details. It gives the image a texture that reads as raw, unpolished, immediate. In State Property's case, that rawness became the entire aesthetic. The film looks exactly like the streets it was shot on, and despite the budget constraints, Variety's review noted something genuinely unexpected. The action sequences were constructed with surprising intricacy and flair. John Woo-style slow motion, layered camera coverage, multiple focal points within a single sequence. Abbott stretched every single dollar and turned a format limitation into a visual identity. Hood cinema doesn't need Hollywood sheen. It needs authenticity. Super 16mm delivered exactly that. Fact number 13. State Property officially launched Roc-A-Fella Films, and Paid in Full came out the same year. State Property wasn't just a movie. It was a declaration of expansion. Roc-A-Fella had conquered rap. They had built careers, moved culture, and established themselves as one of the most dominant forces in hip-hop. Now, they wanted film. State Property became their first feature, the project that officially established Roc Films as a production entity. January 2002. 61 theaters. A statement of intent delivered directly to an audience that had been waiting for it. Later that same year, Roc-A-Fella released Paid in Full, the Harlem drug trade epic starring Wood Harris, Mekhi Phifer, and Cam'ron. Same label, same production banner, completely opposite critical reception. Critics who buried State Property without hesitation showed genuine respect for Paid in Full. Two films from the same house in the same calendar year, occupying completely opposite positions in the critical conversation. The momentum continued. 2003 brought Paper Soldiers, featuring Kevin Hart before the world understood who Kevin Hart was going to become. Then Death of a Dynasty, a satire of the hip-hop industry with cameos from Jay-Z, Mariah Carey, and Aaliyah in one of her final screen appearances. State Property 2 dropped in 2005. Damon Dash directed it himself. Abdul Malik Abbott was not asked back. 4 films in 4 years. State Property was the first brick in that foundation. Fact number 14. The film opened in 61 theaters, then became one of the top-selling home videos in the country. January 18, 2002. 61 theaters. Philadelphia, New York, Atlanta, Chicago. Urban markets where the Roc-A-Fella name was already currency. The theatrical run peaked at 75 screens. Total box office, $2.1 million. Then home video rewrote the math. According to VideoScan and Billboard, State Property climbed to the 10th top-selling video in the United States. Not 10th in its genre, 10th nationally. BT kept it in regular rotation for years. The audience found it in living rooms, passed between friends on VHS and DVD, and the clothing line moved alongside all of it. The theatrical release was the announcement. Home video was the profit. The clothing was the culture made wearable. Fact number 15. Jacob the Jeweler had a cameo playing a fence named Eli. Watch the credits closely. Jacob Arabo, better known as Jacob the Jeweler, appears in State Property as Eli, the man who moves product that fell off trucks and out of safes. Why does this matter? Because Jacob the Jeweler wasn't just a celebrity jeweler. He was the jeweler of an entire era. Biggie wore his pieces. Jay-Z wore his pieces. The entire Roc-A-Fella roster wore his pieces. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, if you had a hit record and real money, you had a Jacob chain. His appearance is a document of a specific ecosystem. Hip-hop money, jewelry, film, fashion, and street credibility all living in the same interconnected space. One of the most perfectly placed Easter eggs in hood cinema history. Fact number 16. The coin flip homage doesn't go back to 1983. It goes back to 1932. The coin flip scene is pure Scarface. Most viewers assume that reference points to the 1983 Brian De Palma film with Al Pacino. But Abbott was reaching much further back. The original coin-flipping mobster appeared in the 1932 Scarface directed by Howard Hawks, where George Raft made the gesture iconic, playing Gino Ronaldo. Casual, rhythmic, while violence unfolded around him. Looney Tunes parodied it. Batman's Two-Face adapted it. Every coin-flipping criminal in film history traces back to George Raft in 1932. Variety caught this, noting that the debt to Scarface goes beyond the coin flip, that the entire structure mirrors Tony Montana's arc. Broke kid, murderous rise, empire built on bodies, betrayal from within, death by assassination. Scarface, with a Philly accent. Fact number 17. Freeway's career was brand new. When State Property filmed. The film helped launch him. When State Property filmed in 2001, Freeway was at the very beginning. He had bars and local buzz, but was not yet the Freeway that hip-hop would recognize as one of the most distinctive voices in Pennsylvania rap history. His inclusion in the film and across the soundtrack was a bet that Roc-A-Fella's roster went deeper than the names already on the marquee. That bet paid off. Freeway's presence gave him a national platform that accelerated his visibility faster than any club circuit could have managed. What We Do, produced by Just Blaze, featuring Jay-Z, became one of the defining Roc-A-Fella tracks of that era. The film didn't just showcase established names, it introduced the next wave. That part of its legacy almost never gets the attention it deserves. Fact number 18. The film's Rotten Tomatoes score has never changed. Still 0% after 23 years. 23 years, 12 reviews, 0%, unchanged, no reappraisal, no retrospective reassessment, no publication reconsidering what State Property got right about its moment, its city, and its audience. The score has sat at 0 since the original reviews came in and has never moved. In an era of constant critical revisionism, where films dismissed in their time are routinely reassigned cultural significance, State Property has been left entirely outside that process. Is it because the film doesn't merit reappraisal on craft terms? Or because the critical apparatus that decides which films deserve a second look has never fully understood the audience this film was made for? 0%, $11 million, still streaming, still quoted. Which metric actually tells you whether a film mattered? Fact number 19. The sequel was directed by Damon Dash, and Abbott was left out completely. State Property 2 arrived in 2005. Same universe, different director. Damon Dash, who played the comedic enforcer Boss Dame in the original, took the director's chair for the sequel, his first feature directorial effort. Abdul Malik Abbott, the man who built the original from nothing, who shot on active drug corners, who stretched a $600,000 budget into an $11 million return. He was not asked back. No public explanation was widely given. He simply was not invited to return to the franchise he had created. The decision reveals something about the internal dynamics of the Roc-A-Fella empire in its later years, already fracturing along fault lines that ran deeper than anyone was publicly acknowledging at the time. Fact number 20. Death of a Dynasty featured Aaliyah in one of her final screen appearances. In 2003, Roc Films released Death of a Dynasty, a satirical comedy with cameos from Jay-Z, Mariah Carey, and Aaliyah. Since Aaliyah had died in August 2001, the footage was archival, captured before her death and used posthumously. For audiences who had already absorbed the story of her near miss on the State Property soundtrack, booked, scheduled, ready, then gone before a single bar was recorded, seeing her on screen inside a Roc-A-Fella production 2 years after her death carried a weight that no context could fully prepare you for. 2 Roc-A-Fella productions, 2 Aaliyah stories, one she almost made while alive, one she appeared in after she was already gone. Fact number 21. The tagline was taken directly from a real criminal organization's code. The decision to take "get down or lay down," the literal operating policy of the JBM, whose leader was on death row, and place it on movie posters in 61 cities deserves its own examination. It collapses the distance between the story and the reality. It signals to anyone who knows what those words mean. And in Philadelphia, many people in those markets knew exactly what they meant, that this film is not performing authenticity, it is reporting it. That decision is brilliant, reckless, or both simultaneously. The fact that it worked doesn't resolve the question it raises about what filmmaking owes to the real communities whose language and tragedy it borrows. A criminal's code became a film's marketing. The streets recognized it immediately. Fact number 22. Kevin Hart was in a Roc-A-Fella film before anyone knew his name. Paper Soldiers, released in 2003 as part of the Roc Films slate, featured Kevin Hart in a comedic role when he was still working the club circuit and building his reputation city by city. Hart was a Philadelphia native. Roc-A-Fella was deeply connected to Philadelphia throughout its entire existence. The overlap was natural. What makes this genuinely striking is the contrast between where Hart stood in 2003, a working comic with local buzz and a modest film credit, and where he ultimately went, globally recognized, box office draw, one of the highest-paid entertainers alive. Roc Films had him on their roster before any of that trajectory became visible to anyone watching. Fact number 23. Roc-A-Fella's film division was active for less than 5 years before the label itself imploded. State Property, Paid in Full, Paper Soldiers, Death of a Dynasty. State Property 2, 4 years, 5 films, then nothing. The Jay-Z and Damon Dash split became public and bitter across 2004 and 2005. The label that had seemed untouchable began fracturing along personal, financial, and creative fault lines that had apparently been building beneath the surface for years. When the label fractured, the film division collapsed with it. The Roc Films era was defined entirely by the window of peak Roc-A-Fella power. State Property was the first brick. It also turned out to be the foundation for something that didn't last nearly as long as the ambition behind it suggested it would. Fact number 24. The film's home video success made it nationally recognized without a wide theatrical release. State Property peaked at 75 screens. A standard wide release in 2002 would have opened on 2,000 to 3,000 screens nationally. The gap between 75 and 3,000 is not a small difference. It is a fundamentally different relationship to the marketplace. And yet the film became nationally recognized, quoted, referenced, returned to repeatedly by people who had never sat in one of those original 75 theaters. The distribution model delivered the film directly to the communities it was made for, bypassing the traditional theatrical market almost entirely. And those communities kept it alive through living rooms, BET rotation, and sustained word of mouth in ways no advertising campaign could have manufactured. This is a distribution case study that deserves serious examination. Fact number 25. Beanie Sigel went to federal prison the same year. State Property 2 was released. In 2005, the same calendar year that State Property 2 arrived in theaters, Beanie Sigel was sentenced to federal prison on weapons charges. He served his time and was eventually released, but the timing creates a particular and almost unbearably precise cultural punctuation mark on the entire State Property story. The man who was the face of the franchise, the actor whose credibility and authentic presence made the original film feel genuinely real to the audience watching it, the rapper whose bars on the soundtrack helped push the album to #1 on the hip-hop charts. In federal custody the same year his franchise's sequel arrived. For audiences who had followed Beanie Sigel's career closely, this was not entirely shocking. His legal history was documented, and the world he rapped and acted about was never entirely separate from the world he actually lived in. Art imitating life, life confirming art, Philadelphia refusing, as always, to allow any comfortable distance between the two. Fact number 26. The State Property clothing line existed under the same umbrella that eventually sold for $204 million. State Property Apparel operated as a subsidiary under the Roc-A umbrella, the same brand that carried Jay-Z's full fashion vision and continued growing throughout the early and mid-2000s into a genuinely significant business operation. Roc-A eventually sold to Iconic's brand group in 2007 for $204 million. That means the State Property brand, the film, the clothing line with its hidden holsters, the cultural identity built around a $600,000 movie, was part of an asset ecosystem that was eventually worth 9 figures when it transacted at the highest level. The irony of that fact becomes almost unbearable in the context of what came next for Damon Dash. Because while Jay-Z's stake in Roc-A ultimately became part of a $204 million transaction, Dash's portion of the Roc-A-Fella assets, including State Property and everything attached to it, went in a direction that could not have been more different. Same empire, 2 exits, no comparison between them whatsoever. Fact number 27. When Jay-Z left Roc-A-Fella, Dash was left without the label's gravitational center. When Jay-Z aligned fully with Def Jam, eventually ascending to its presidency, the label that he and Dash had built together from nothing was fundamentally and permanently transformed overnight. Roc-A without Jay-Z was not a smaller version of the same thing. It was a different proposition entirely, operating in a landscape where the name still carried weight, but the engine that had generated that weight was no longer present. Dash continued to operate under the brand and continued pushing forward, but the artists who remained, talented as they were not Jay-Z. And in the commercial reality of mid-2000s hip-hop, that specific gap was the precise difference between long-term sustainability and gradual decline that compounds until it becomes impossible to stop. Dash's decisions during this period, business, personal, legal, accumulated in ways that made recovery increasingly difficult with each passing year. State property, the proud declaration of Roc-A-Fella power in January 2002, began to look less like a landmark achievement and more like a historical artifact from an era that had already closed. And then came what happened next. Fact number 28. And the bonus. In December 2025, Damon Dash's film company sold at public auction. The winning bid was $100.50. This is the fact that reframes everything. Poppington LLC, Damon Dash's film production company, was put up for public auction on December 30th, 2025. The assets included State Property, State Property 2, Honor Up, Mr. Untouchable, and additional films from across his catalog. Decades of work, a body of films that had generated millions, a legacy that launched a film studio and introduced a generation to hood cinema. The winning bid, $100.50, not $100 million, not $100,000, $100.50. The buyer was Mike Monteser, CEO of Muddy Water Motion Pictures, the same company that had been in legal disputes with Dash for years. Monteser publicly described the purchase as a deliberate jab. Attorney Chris Brown, representing other creditors, noted that no outside bidders even showed up. No one else came. Here is the sequence that led to this point: a 2019 dispute over the film. Dear Frank produced an $85,000 copyright infringement judgment. That was manageable. What followed was not. Dash went on the Earn Your Leisure podcast and made a statement about the plaintiff that resulted in a $4 million defamation judgment. $4 million. For words spoken on a podcast. And separately, in November 2024, just weeks before the film auction, Dash's stake in Roc-A-Fella Records itself was auctioned off to cover $8.7 million in back taxes owed to New York State. The state now owns his share of the label he helped build from nothing. The film that launched Roc-A-Fella's entire film division. The movie that earned 18 times its budget. The project that introduced Beanie Siegel to the world. Sold for less than the cost of a decent dinner. State property was never supposed to work. No stars that showed up on schedule. No budget that impressed anyone in the industry. No critics who offered a single kind word after seeing it. Just a $600,000 bet placed by a rap label on a story the streets already knew, shot on the actual corners where that story had played out in real time, by a director who had been earning his place at the table for over a decade before anyone handed it to him. The film earned $11 million. The soundtrack hit #1. The clothing line moved units through markets the studios weren't even paying attention to. The sequel got made, and for a brief, extraordinary window between 2002 and 2005, Roc-A-Fella owned film the same way they had already owned rap, not by asking permission, but by building something the audience wanted before the industry understood what was being built. Then the empire fractured. Lawsuits arrived from multiple directions. Tax lions accumulated. Auctions ended things that years of creative work had built. The man who produced State Property lost not just the film, he lost his record label stake, his entire film catalog, his production company, and decades of work. The price someone paid to acquire all of it? $100. But here is what $100 cannot buy, and never will. It cannot purchase the fact that people are still watching State Property in 2025. It cannot acquire the memory of what Beanie Siegel brought to that role or what those performances meant to the audience that recognized itself in them. It cannot own the cultural moment the film created or the door it opened for everything in hood cinema that followed it. The streets showed up for State Property when every critic in the country walked away. The streets always showed up. That loyalty is the one thing that cannot be auctioned. Get down or lay down. That was the motto then. 23 years later, the film is still standing. Can't say the same for the empire that made it. If this taught you something, hit subscribe. Drop a comment below with your favorite Roc-A-Fella film. And tell me, did state property deserve better? Or did it get exactly what it needed? Not critical respect, but something more durable than that. Thanks for watching.